Hello and welcome to News Center. I am Ashmit Kumar. Now, tariffs, trade and defense collaboration is likely to feature high on Prime Minister Modi's agenda when he meets US President Donald Trump in Washington later this week. Now, Donald Trump has singled out India on multiple. Democrats told CNBC-TV18 last week that India had already streamlined tariffs when it came to the US imports. India's defense secretary had also said that they are ready to procure more defense equipment from the United States. The statement is important since Trump has vowed reciprocal tariffs on metals later this week. This after announcing plans to formalize 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium. However, the road to Washington for Prime Minister Modi will go through Paris. The Prime Minister is en route to France for the first of the two-leg of his two-nation visit. He will co-chair the AI Action Summit, which French President Emmanuel Macron. We will be discussing Modi's upcoming trip to the United States with our guests in just a bit. But first, here's President Trump announcing his latest tariff salvo.
I'll be announcing probably Tuesday or Wednesday at a news conference reciprocal tariffs. And very simply, it's if they charge us, we charge them. Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum, too.
10%?
10, no, 25%.
25 for aluminum as well?
25 for both.
We should not really anticipate something which is not really stated. The kind of thing which you say, tariff against India. This has not been stated. I mean, if the US admin or anybody has not really stated, so why should we really be saying so? So that will be premature and not warranted because, these are different grounds on which the tariff is being put in. So far as we are concerned, we are a very open economy. If you really look at the US imports into India, most of them are into a very, the tariffs are very low.
We do have some procurements which are on the anvil where American companies would be in the picture. And as long as they are able to meet our requirements in terms of quality and in terms of certain levels of indigenization, of course, we'll be, those are carrots that will be, that we will be able to dangle before the Americans. We are already, meeting a good proportion of our requirements from capable American companies, and we intend to continue doing so. There will be significant buys, and some of that will go to the US as well.
Well, we're now joined by former Commerce Secretary Ajay Dua. Thank you so much, Mr. Dua, for joining us on the show. And shortly, we'll also be joined by Ambassador Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the United States. But Mr. Dua, coming to you first. Ominous words there coming in from President Donald Trump aboard Air Force One, talking about imposing tariffs on all aluminum and steel coming into the United States. Now, India has limited exposure when it comes to export of steel or aluminium to the United States, so we don't really get impacted there. But there is certainly that overhang. Donald Trump calling India the tariff king, imposing these tariffs. There is conversations within Indian circles as to what this might actually translate into as we head deeper into 2025. Your quick thoughts to begin with on the tariff overhang on this bilateral conversation between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi.
Ashmit, I don't really apprehend that the tariffs upon India would be the central theme when Prime Minister Modi meets President Trump, for the simple reason that we are not in that category of high tariffs on imports, particularly from the United States. The goods which come to India from the United States are largely, as you know, LNG, crude oil, diamonds that are actually re-exported in a way, but sent back to us after having been worked upon or in raw form. All those items, their duties are either zero or near zero, and certainly not more than 10%. So the average will be somewhere between 0 to 10%. So I think while talking about, when President Trump talked about it well before his swearing in, he was talking in terms of general level and general perception that India protects itself, whether it is for its
Fair enough.
Atmanirbhar program or
Let me,
Made in India that we've been living
right. Mr. Dua,
high.
let me bring in the recently concluded budget. We saw multiple tariff lines for whether it's high-end bikes, high-end luxury cars, solar cells, chemicals. We saw reduction and rationalization of customs that we charge on a number of these tariff lines. Is that one in anticipation of any action that may come from the United States? And if that's the trajectory that the Indian government is taking, can we expect even deeper cuts as we head into 2025 or even in Washington with the Prime Minister meeting Donald Trump?
Probably, yes, that the action which was taken was in anticipation of any move by President, any kind of so-called threatening move by President Donald Trump. Harley-Davidson mobiles, which is the more prominent one, which always figures at one time saying we are levying very high duties because we don't let Harley-Davidson come into India. We allowed that, then we are protecting it a little bit through our mobile industry by levying duties, higher duties on that. On that, we have relented because it doesn't make too much of a difference to India. The number of mobiles which Harley-Davidson, they cost too much, between 3 lakhs, the lowest model, to some 24 lakh rupees, the highest one which comes into India. There are only 3,000 to 4,000 bikes which are exported to India, and the people who use those bikes can probably afford to pay a little more duty also. That was our logic earlier. Now, if it makes a difference to the United States, we have sort of even brought this down further. The question is, what are the goods which really come into, or which India exports there? We are not much of an exporter of steel products or of aluminium, which in the last term also, President Trump levied a duty, 25% and 10%, if you recall. He's talking about, which was undone by his successor. He's talking about globally levying a duty, not just for India, a duty of 25% on steel imports.
So not aimed at India, but India may compensate for this fear, this apprehension in the mind of Donald Trump with perhaps a few duty cuts being announced in Washington. Mr. Dua, let me bring in a new dynamic here. This is the Elon Musk dynamic. When we talk of this apprehension in the mind of the US administration that US has not been able to make inroads, that India enjoys a trade surplus, they have a deficit with us. And here walks in Elon Musk, again, has the year of the president. And at the same time, his companies haven't quite enjoyed the kind of inroad success that they've seen elsewhere. So whether we talk about electric vehicles, whether we talk about Starlink, haven't quite managed to make the inroads here, regulatory challenges here for both these companies. How much of a factor will that play? We're already hearing reports that Elon Musk will be calling on the Indian Prime Minister. How much of a factor will that be as far as conversations between Trump and Modi are concerned?
Ashwat, I would not underplay it. It is very possible that the very fact that the President Trump during his election campaign called India the tariff king, it's one of the tariff king sort of countries, that it was because of President Elon Musk having got close to President during his campaign, and the fact that he had wanted us to reduce the duties on his Tesla motors coming into India, and he had one meeting with the Prime Minister. Second, he dropped out of at the last moment when he came to know that he's not going to be getting any duty cuts after even calling on the Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister, a second time. So it could could have given a broad impression that to President Trump, when hearing from Mr. Musk about, the Indian duties on his vehicles, his high-cost Tesla cars. But I think even there, the fact is the president himself, Donald Trump, is himself now saying, I am not, and he's passed an executive order on the very first day of his swearing in on any subsidy being given to mobile renewable sources of energy,
Okay.
as well as electric mobility. That includes the battery operated cars. So he cannot now be expecting that India would, because for us it is outright kind of foregoing income revenue if we are expected to duties on Tesla in India, while in the United States there is no special concession being afforded to renewables or electric mobility.
Right, Mr. Dua. Let's go across to our other guest, Ambassador Meera Shankar, who's joining us live on the phone line. Ambassador Shankar, again, the overhang. I was just discussing with Mr. Dua on the overhang that exists between this meeting, between India, between Modi, as well as Donald Trump. The question I wanted to ask is that in this overhang, when we're looking at issues of deportations, when you're looking at issues of duties, tariffs being announced by the US president, what to your mind will be the key aspects that you'll watch for in terms of agendas that India will try to drive home with the US president?
I think India will try to re-establish the strategic partnership on a firmer footing with the new Trump 2.0. I think they will deal pragmatically with some of the issues which could be difficulties in the relationship. For instance, on illegal migration, India has already said that they will take back illegal migrants, but perhaps they need to point out to President Trump that it becomes more difficult to navigate if it is done as part of high theater in military aircraft with people coming in handcuffs. It becomes an internal issue in India. So a more discreet approach, as was the case in the past, with, chartered aircraft or civilian aircraft, I think works better in Indian conditions. And what they have to point out is that itself is something which Trump should also, the US should also want, because after all, if this issue becomes like a, political issue on which there are high emotions, then it becomes far more difficult for the Indian government to navigate. Now, on tariffs, you have a statement today by, I think, the Commerce Secretary, that the tariffs on the top 30 goods that we import from the U.S. range from 0 to 7%, 7.5%. So that's not very high. And he also explained down tariffs on motorcycles, which have engines which are not produced in India. So it's not eating into the established domestic market. But I do believe that you need a mixture. You don't need a mixture of complete flexibility in terms of, acceding to everything the U.S. says. You need the ability to be able to hang firm on some issues and to pragmatically concede on certain issues. Otherwise, you see what happens with a country like the U.S. is whatever concessions you give are just pocketed, and it's moved to the next goalpost, and you whet the appetite for more.
You whet the appetite for more. Clearly a tightrope walk that the Prime Minister will have to do, balancing multiple issues simultaneously. Ambassador, I also want to ask you on the personal dynamic between the two leaders. Public memory, if you recount the public memory, what you have in your mind, there are images that are thrown up of Howdy Modi, the big two figures together. That one figure weighs heavy on the mind of the public imagination. But given since Trump 2.0, we've seen strong language being used against India. So whether that's deportations, whether it's about AI sovereignty, whether it's about tariffs being imposed, whether it's about the trade deficit, you think that Howdy Modi factor is firmly behind us, that this is completely a new dynamic that the Prime Minister will have to tread in Washington?
I think Trump has come on an agenda to impose tariffs on all countries across the world, and he is making no exceptions. So India too will be in the crosshairs. But at the same time, we should not be a priority for the U.S. because we are not among the top exporters to the U.S. Our total trade, two ways, in goods and services is about $200 billion, little short of that. And the trade surplus that India has had, it's a very small one, ranging between $20 to $35 billion. May have been a little more last year, but not very much more. So when you're looking at countries who have trade surpluses of hundreds of billions of dollars, yes, India could come into focus for some sectional interests which push, some constituency of Trump, which pushes, like happened with the Harley-Davidson, or agriculture. And it could also come into focus for harmonizing policies on artificial intelligence or digitization. But I don't see us as being a priority target for the U.S.
Sure.
Those are Canada, Mexico, and China, who together account for more than 42% of imports into the United States. So I think they are going to be the priority, then followed by the EU. But one difference that you'll notice this time is that his MAGA constituency has been directly targeting persons of Indian origin, especially legal immigrants in the U.S., beyond those who are there illegally. They've also been targeting legal, professionals, saying that they should stop the H-1B program because this leads to the browning of America. So a clear racist undertone to the demands and the comments being made, though big tech and also President Trump till now have said that they are in favor of continuing the program, and the U.S. needs it because they have a skill shortage, and this aids their competitiveness. But what you might see is, because I don't think the debate has ended amongst Trump supporters, it will continue.
Sure.
And what you might see is perhaps stiffer conditionalities for H-1Bs, higher fees, making it more difficult to get extensions, and so on. So this is part of Trump's global agenda. It flows from the promises he has made to his domestic constituency to get manufacturing and jobs back to America. Now, all countries have to deal with this. They have to cope with this the best way they can.
Right, Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Clearly, it will certainly not be easy as what it was during Trump 1.0. A number of dynamics have changed in terms of how the relationships are between the two countries, between the two leaders. Clearly, a lot to look out for as Prime Minister gets set to land in Washington tomorrow. But that, unfortunately, is all the time that we have as a part of this discussion. I'd like to thank both of our guests, Mr. Dua, Ambassador Shankar. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we'll slip into a very short break. But coming up, the government's ambitious 2018 plan to build a refinery in Maharashtra's Ratnagiri has run into trouble. A special report when we come back.